Welcome to ETF Edge. It has been a lousy week for Bitcoin ETF believers. SEC Chair Gary Gensler has thrown cold water on the idea he will imminently approve the many Bitcoin ETFs under registration. Joining us to discuss, Dave Laval, Global Head of ETFs at Grayscale Investments. Simeon Hyman is the Global Investment Strategist for ProShares and the man behind the newly launched Bitcoin Strategy Pro Fund. And that's a mutual fund that holds Bitcoin futures. And my old friend Dan Egan, there he is, Managing Director of Behavioral Finance and Investing at Betterment. Dave, let me start with you. Grayscale runs the Bitcoin Trust, obviously the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. You said you want to convert that fund into an ETF as soon as possible, but handicap this for us. People are trying to figure this out. Gensler has essentially signaled that he's going to support Bitcoin futures ETFs, but not necessarily a pure Bitcoin ETF. Is that your read? And give us your sense of where it's going from here.
Right. Well, we viewed it very favorably at Grayscale because this is no longer a question of, if there's going to be a Bitcoin ETF, but in fact when. And at Grayscale, we've committed to converting GBTC into a Bitcoin ETF when regulators are allowing that. And we view it to be quite favorable. And this is just the beginning of our ETF business, and we think that we're going to be very open to all different types of products with all different underlyings to meet our investors' demands.
Simeon, that was a nice optimistic little spin on things. Eventually something's going to happen down the road, but I have to say, it's for people who are Bitcoin purists, they consider a Bitcoin futures ETF a bit of a tough sell. Now, you were in the right place at the right time. You launched your mutual fund,
that's right,
Bitcoin futures ETF. Tell us how that works and what you see the prospects. So how do you read Gensler?
We were really happy to launch the first Bitcoin futures mutual fund. And that's a really important access point for folks. Number one, the futures have the advantage of being a regulated place. It's the CME, CFTC, the clearinghouse. And this is the only avenue for an open-ended mutual fund where you can get in and out every day at NAV. So that's, we think, a real move forward for opportunities for people who maybe wanted this kind of more common and more usual type of exposure that people are familiar with from other parts of the market.
Yeah. Now, the complaints about the futures, people who use futures contracts for proxies for the underlying here. About the complaints about the rollover cost, the high rollover cost. Can you tell us a little bit about what you anticipate the rollover cost? Because you're going to be buying near front month future contracts. You're going to have a rollover cost. How is that going to impact how you price this? And do you anticipate your Bitcoin futures mutual fund or ETF will in any way approximate how Bitcoin trades?
So the thing we know from history is that those front month futures contracts are extremely highly correlated to the tune of about 0.9, both correlation and volatility with spot Bitcoin. We don't really know what roll costs will ultimately be. It's been a very volatile asset class, in fact, going straight up for much of the last couple of years of history. But of course, there are costs in any way that you would get exposure to Bitcoin, whether it's spreads in the spot market, whether it's OTC trading of various vehicles. So there are going to be a lot of ways for people to get exposure here with some pluses and minuses, but we certainly think that the regulated future space in a regulated mutual fund and an ETF, if it's ever allowed, is certainly a way that some people will really appreciate.
Dan, let me bring you in. Betterment is a big financial advisory firm, a robo-advisory firm as well. How are Betterment clients reacting to this recent rally, the 50% rally in Bitcoin in the last month? And what, if any, advice do you give them about investing in crypto as the behavioral expert?
I gotta say, right now the silence is deafening. Back in 2017, we spent a lot of time trying to listen to our customers, and we have multiple channels that they can speak to us through where they can annotate what they're doing with their money. And back in 2017, when this was the first time that Bitcoin was really peaking, we saw a lot. We saw a lot of messages, a lot of questions, a lot of, actually, I might move my money out to go over to this new thing. In contrast to that, we're not seeing anything. So I think the volatility is good, but I think in order to see significant inbound interest, in order to see people really moving money, especially on the individual investor side, we need to see it break new highs. For those sort of like attention-grabbing meme stock type assets, just moving around isn't enough. It actually needs to be the one thing that's moving the most to be able to garner all the attention to get people to pile into it. So as of yet, it hasn't hit new highs. We're not seeing too many people talking about it.
Yeah. Well, look, Dave, what does it take? What's it going to take This is the topic of the
Right.
du jour. I hate to keep hitting on it, but what's it going to take for Gensler to approve a pure Bitcoin ETF? He seems to be signaling, as Simeon said, I'm sorry, Bitcoin futures is a regulated market. Currently, I don't have any control over a good aspect of the Bitcoin market, and therefore I've got problems. What is it going to take for Gensler to get to say yes on a pure Bitcoin product?
For 25 years, we've been innovating in the ETF market, and so the SEC is always going to say it's about investor protection, which it is. But when SPY came to market, right, it was novel, it was innovative, but it was a market cap weighted U.S. equity-based product. It's now $385 billion. But throughout the history of ETFs, each step of evolution, whether it was international equities, commodities, futures-based products, fixed income, subsectors of fixed income, the same process has happened. And really, at the end of the day, to get into a little bit technical, it's ensuring that there isn't going to be a dislocation in the secondary market trading of that ETF, right? That the price is trading versus that underlying price. And so, when the SEC gets comfortable that there's enough transparency and enough maturity in the underlying market, we're going to see an ETF.
Other than someday this will happen, Simeon, is that what needs to happen at this point? What does Gensler need to have to say, I'm comfortable now going ahead of Bitcoin ETF?
Yeah, I'll demur from kind of trying to forecast what the SEC. We were passing a little bit, but I think Dave's point is a good one. Look, this will evolve. We are in the early innings. The underlying use cases of DeFi and the ledger and anonymity, those things, and concerns over an environment of very low interest rates and possibly weakening central bank currencies, those are all things that drive the underlying value. Yeah. There will be a myriad of ways for folks to get exposure over time. Futures-based mutual fund, that's allowed today. Futures-based ETF might be allowed tomorrow. Spot ETF, perhaps sometime in the future. We're all watching it, and we're watching it. And when those opportunities avail themselves, we'll be exploring them very carefully.
Dan, does Betterment have a dog in this race? I mean, how does you feel, or how does the community there feel about what they want to invest in?
I got to say, an ETF would make it a lot easier just because it's going to be exchange traded, a lot more transparent, and it obviously solves the custody issues. From a magnitude point of view, though, it's not that big. I do think that a little bit of cryptocurrency, for any kind of speculative asset, whatever it is, goes a long way. You do not need a lot in your portfolio, either from a volatility angle or from a sort of speculative angle. A little bit goes a long way. So generally, when people ask us, we're going to say, definitely sub 10%, generally between 3 and 5% is plenty. You just got to make sure that's money that if it comes down to it, you can afford to lose because it is very volatile. So watch out. The last thing, if it is a speculative investment that I think a lot of people don't think about, buying is easy, knowing when to sell is hard. So when you get in, start thinking ahead of time about what are my exit criteria here? When is it going to make sense for me to get out of it?
Yeah, my old friend Rick Edelman, 5-6 years ago, when I asked him, what are you telling the #1 RIA in the country? He said, Bob, there's a very simple way to look at this. Try having it as 1% of your portfolio. It's not going to matter that much if it drops, but it has the potential to double, triple, and then all of a sudden, instead of 1% of your portfolio, it's 3 or 4 or 5%. That made some eminent sense to me, that if you didn't want to completely stay away from it, but didn't want to go all in, the 1% hypothesis, and Dan was sort of alluding to that in a way, made a lot of sense to me. Let me ask you about Gensler's comments. He seems to be indicating he's going to be more aggressive on enforcement. Mm-hmm. He said he's seeking additional authority from Congress to prevent transactions, I'm literally reading from a statement here, products and platforms from falling between regulatory cracks. And he seems to be raising the prospect of even more enforcement efforts here, particularly maybe even on ICOs. I wonder if this is going to give any more pause to the Bitcoin community at all.
So I would say, look, I'm a week and a half into my Bitcoin, being at Grayscale, my Bitcoin experience. So I got a little more time to learn about that before I comment with more clarity. But we're certainly paying very close attention to that, as we are with the rest of the congressional commentary around cryptocurrencies. And he mentioned the tokens. He didn't make a ruling on anything, but he said, they seem like investment contracts to me. If you offer them, it's that old Howey test. If you give some guy money and you're anticipating making money, that's an investment contract. That falls under the SEC. He seems to be, and I'm reading between the cracks, but I don't think I'm crazy, that they're almost all investment contracts and should fall under the purview, implying that a lot of people are unregistered.
out there. There's unregistered securities out there.
Well, all of these pieces of the crypto world have different uses. Bitcoin is not the same as Ethereum. And we're in such the early innings that there are going to be evolutions of usage. There are going to be evolutions of regulation. Those are all going to be facts of where we are in this nascent business, but it's not going away. And investors are going to want multiple ways to get that exposure, because you may need that exposure to to spot Bitcoin. You may need your own wallet. You may need your private key, or you may just want a 1% allocation in a portfolio for diversification, digital gold, alternative to currency, in which case something like a futures-based mutual fund or an ETF might be a great solution for you.
You made a good point, Simeon. People might want Bitcoin in a lot of different ways. Grayscale Bitcoin Trust has been very successful.
Sure.
I find that people are a little confused about what it is.
Right.
Maybe you could take 30 seconds, and I know this is a primer, but people need to understand what it is. It's not a mutual fund.
Yep.
It's not really a closed-end fund either,
Yep.
though some people think it is because you own a set number of Bitcoin.
Yep.
What is it exactly?
So there's an evolution to the products that we have brought out, starting with the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. It starts as a private placement, then it moves to be a public quotation, and now it's an SEC reporting company, hopefully with the goal of becoming an ETF. But it's traded on OTCBB. There's a lot of
over the counter.
Over the counter. It's traded over the counter. There's a lot of talk about it trading at a discount, and we've been on the record, and I continue to say that typically something trading at a discount can be a buying opportunity. And if we do have the ability to have regulatory approval to launch an ETF, that discount should collapse.
Yeah. So it's people somehow think it's a closed-end fund. It's not technically a closed-end fund at all, even though you own a set number of Bitcoin. This is where the confusion comes in. I don't want to get too far into the weeds,
right.
But it's a grant or trust, I think is the technical word.
I think people make that distinction that it trades like a closed-end fund because of the premium and discount characteristic to it.
Yeah. And it did trade at a premium up until February or so, and then we started trading at a discount.
Yeah, it traded at even a steeper discount, and now it's rebounded significantly.
Yeah. And the initial Bitcoin holding, you have what, 650,000? It's somewhere around there, right?
Correct.
Right now. Right.
Correct.
And is it still fair to say that roughly 1,000, is that the normal ratio to a Bitcoin?
So it's roughly 1,000 shares to one Bitcoin.
Yeah. I always like to say there's 10 shares of the GLD, you get gold.
Right.
And roughly 1,000 here you get.
Right.
I know you can trade the discounts and everything,
right.
but that's a rough estimate, right?
Rough estimate.
That's a fair estimate. Okay.